Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Only in San Jose podcast. My name is Alina Yin, and I will be your host. And together, we will journey through the process of civic participation in the city of San Jose. Hello, and welcome, everyone. On this episode, we will be taking a deep dive into one very special commission. There has not been a Charter Review Commission since 1986, and before that, 1965. Today's Charter Review Commission is made up of 23 San Jose residents. They are a temporary advisory commission, meaning it is not permanent, and they exist to render counsel and advice to the council. They meet every other Monday until around October 14th, I believe. Dates are tentative depending on the commission work. I've included a link in the show notes to their calendar. So this commission started their work on January 11th of this year, and council has given them until December 14th to review and make recommendations on our city constitution, also known as our city charter. Now, let me tell you why this is so important. Now, this is, and I quote from the National League of Cities, "A city charter is the basic document that defines the organization, powers, functions, and essential procedures of city government. It is comparable to the Constitution of the United States and the state's constitution. The charter is, therefore, the most important legal document of any city." End quote. So another way to look at this is it is similar to a service contract between the people of San Jose and other San Jose resident-elect and appointed staff persons and paid employees of the city. This contract dictates how services are rendered, delivered, along with specific requirements for our elected officials, our legislative procedures, and determines what one can and cannot do. This is our city constitution. It is the highest governing document of our city governance structure, right after the California and U.S. Constitution. The charter can only be changed by the vote of the people, and that is initiated in one of three ways. One is, a majority vote of council during, a council meeting, and two, by petition, and three, by a charter review commission. Even though the commission is advisory, so it still has to go to council and win the majority vote before being placed on the ballot. But those are the three ways that the charter is usually addressed. And so this commission's task, is to study the charter to understand whether the city governance structure is appropriately suited, as it is right now, to meet the complex needs of our community today. Specifically, 5 things. Number 1 is to examine our form of government. Now, in the U.S., there are 2 known major types. However, voters actually hold a lot of power in customizing these types of government. So no 2 are exactly the same, maybe some, but there's a lot of varieties to these 2. Our current form is a council mayor, where the power and legislative authority is equally distributed between the 10 council members and the mayor, commonly referred to as a weak mayor. And last summer, the mayor proposed switching to a mayor-council government structure in which the mayor has executive authority and the council has legislative authority, commonly referred to as strong mayor. Now, as a person with decades of experience in marketing and branding, I want to make a distinction that strong mayor and weak mayor are very misleading nomenclatures / names for these forms of government. In the supposed weak mayor form, they are not really weak, they are just equal with everyone else. In the strong mayor, however, it is the council's powers that is weakened and redistributed to one person, the mayor. So technically they, the mayor, are stronger, but the name alone centers one person, the mayor, versus the collective council and mayor. Personally, since I was a kid, I've always questioned why things are named or called what they are. So just some food for thought there. Second, they are tasked with researching and soliciting community input on the form of government and other potential charter reforms to improve and update the city governance structure. 3, to evaluate the mayoral election if they should be transitioned to the presidential election cycle. The thought behind that was to increase voter turnout for the mayoral elections because historically they have been very low. If so, then, that requires some math, and they're going to have to figure out when the new mayor is elected in 2022, would they serve a 2-year term or a 6-year term? And 4, they will be looking at transitioning the even-numbered districts and the odd-numbered districts election cycle. So currently, the even-numbered districts are during the presidential cycle, and the odd-numbered districts are during the gubernatorial cycle. And 5, lastly, is to consider additional measures and potential charter amendments as needed that will improve accountability, representation, and inclusion at San Jose. So for this episode, I actually really wanted to focus on that last part, Section 5 of what the commission is tasked to do. And this episode is going to be kind of really setting us up to envision and dream a little about what is possible in this moment with this opportunity that we have. However, before we get into that, I would like to provide some context about what was going on in the world during the 1960s when the foundation of our current city charter came to be. So our city charter was written in 1965, and there was a lot going on in that decade, but I'm going to focus us on 2 pieces of legislation. Number 1, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the most comprehensive civil rights legislation ever enacted by Congress. It contained extensive measures to dismantle Jim Crow segregation and combat racial discrimination. The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. And I'm going to repeat that. This started on a state and local level. These laws were formed in response to the 15th Amendment from 1870 that gave Black men the right to vote. And in some places, Black voter registration reached 90% because of this law. And that was also only 5 years after the 13th Amendment of 1865 that abolished slavery. The following year, in 1965, came the Voting Rights Act, which removed barriers to Black enfranchisement in the southern United States, banning poll taxes, literacy tests, and other measures that effectively prevented African Americans from voting. This was an extremely important piece of legislation that enabled accessibility. Now, the Voting Rights Act had a special clause, Section 5, that stipulated that no change in voting procedures could take effect until it was approved by the specified federal authorities in Washington, D.C., i.e. Congress, and this was to prevent a Jim Crow situation from happening again on the state and local level. These laws took place during very turbulent times in the 60s. There were many marches and many protests. We had the Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Equal Pay Act, there was the Vietnam War. We elected our first African-American woman to Congress, Shirley Chisholm. The beginning of the gay rights movement happened during this decade, Summer of Love, so many, many things. And when we look back on history, what is highlighted are the marches and the protests, and highlighted by media, and in part because it is one of the most beautiful things to witness and also one of the most brutal and violent things we can witness and participate in. However, in between all of this, there were people, namely legislatures and lobbyists, shaping what was happening into words that would later become law. And it is these words, these laws, that redefine the new social contract, what one can and cannot do if they wish to be a part of this society and democracy. And this is the focus of this episode, this commission. And trust me, I'm struggling myself to make this information more accessible, let alone proficiently understand it. So now, nearly 50 years later, coming to the present, voter turnout and registration rates in those covered jurisdictions of the Voting Rights Act of the South. So it covered the whole 50 states, but it mainly impacted the southern United States. And now voter registration had reached parity with the national average in those areas. So the law worked. However, in 2012, we had a big plot twist. So two things happened. Barack Obama won re-election, and for the first time, ever, Black people voted at a higher rate than white people. That same year, a case named Shelby v. Holder made it to the Supreme Court. That case took aim at Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the section that required congressional approval to make any changes to voting procedures. Section 5 was eliminated under the premise that it was no longer needed because racism was over, according to the record turnout of Black voters in 2012. Since that ruling, at least 1,688 counties have closed polling places. Non-white precincts now have fewer voting machines and longer lines, and it's even illegal for Black organizations to register people to vote. In 2016, Trump was elected president, and then 2020, then COVID, then Black Lives Matter happened. And with all of that, for the last 2 years, we have been very focused on safety. And during 2020, in a presidential election year, we were focused with creating a safe place for people to vote and making sure that people could vote. So people and organizations came together to ensure that, you could vote via absentee and mail-in ballot, creating, again, the highest voter turnout in 120 years at 67%. And this hasn't been seen since the 1900 election, where the voter turnout was 73.7%. Then came Biden, and our first woman and woman of color vice president happened. A lot has changed. A lot has regressed. And the thing with change is it either begets more change or tremendous resistance to it. So let's think about systemic change and the law for a minute. When we think of systemic change, say like the civil rights movement, what is spotlighted by the media is only half the story. It's the speeches, it's the marches, the protests. No one is covering the writing of the laws, who they are, the process, how do we do it, how does the public participate in it? In part because it's very bureaucratic. It's very difficult to explain the process. I struggle myself. And I've been writing this episode for months, trying to make it interesting and relevant. And this shit is hard. Speaking of more hard times, the law, the byproduct, the catalyst of systemic change, law school is expensive. I did not go to law school. Law is hard to understand. Ivy Leagues are the gatekeepers of new legislators, especially any wanting to make it for the Supreme Court. Yet laws are what governs our society. Looping back, to the city charter, these laws are what govern the people of San Jose. It tells us what we can and cannot do. And in my time of digging into local government, this is the most powerful tool of change that remains inaccessible till this day to the majority of us because we're not lawyers. However, we shouldn't have to be, but maybe we also shouldn't be this far away from the legislative process either. And I'm not talking about just the law of our lands. I'm talking about the law of our lives, those pesky terms and conditions that were on the mortgage loans that led to the 2008 housing crisis, the terms and conditions on our credit cards and social media, to your employment contract. I mean, did you know that according to various legal scholars, the doctrine of at-will employment first appeared in 1877 as a statement in a legal treatise named On the Law of Master and Servant by Horace C. Wood. As a reminder, this was very shortly after the 13th and 15th Amendment that abolished slavery and allowed Black Americans to vote. If you haven't noticed, I've been really heavily digging into this stuff. And so for the sake of accessibility, I'm going to use an analogy to explain why I feel it's so important to have more civic education around civic participation, which is the process of making laws and how the public participates in it with their elected legislators. So think of the law as magic. I'm talking about Hocus Pocus and Disney movies, the Mummy trilogies, spells written in books, and when you speak them, the magic words will invoke your desires into reality. For those that are younger and listening to this, I apologize for the dated references. I'm a millennial. Okay, so in Disney's Little Mermaid, she signs a contract, giving up her voice to walk on land, which, if you think about it, is very similar to a non-disclosure agreement, aka NDA, or a severance agreement, which sometimes also includes a non-disclosure agreement. And for those of you who've signed some, you know what I mean. And for those of you who haven't, what it means is you're just not allowed to talk about said topic. This happens sometimes in exchange for monetary compensation. If you agree, you keep your mouth shut about what's happening. And if you break it, there are grave consequences, legal repercussions. You could be sued, and, court debts and court fees are a very serious thing. The consequences of breaking the law is a long list. You can go to jail. You can get the death sentence. I mean, the Jim Crow laws were written and then they became real life. And people who broke them, they faced life and death consequences. It's not just words. They enable something to be possible. They shape our lived reality. Our lives are filled with contractual agreements, and it's not sprinkled in fairy dust or talking books, the fantasies that we've all grown up with, but it works in the sense that once a law is voted on by the majority of the electorate, or if it's a specific agreement that you signed, it becomes the powers that bind. I recently learned of this term called spirit of the law and the letter of the law. It was in the Bible that the first recorded use of this phrase was actually found, and this is what it means. When one obeys the letter of the law, but not the spirit, one is obeying the literal interpretation of the words, the letters of the law, but not necessarily the intent of those who wrote the law. Conversely, when one obeys the spirit of the law but not the letter, one is doing what the authors of that law intended, though not necessarily adhering to the literal wording. And an example I'll share is, let's say, parent setting a curfew to be home by 9:30 p.m. The letter of that agreement, if we're doing the letter of the law, 9:31 p.m. is late and you are grounded. Now, the spirit of that agreement is safety and respect. We just want you home at a reasonable time. Therefore, 9:31 p.m. is okay, but you should avoid it so you're not grounded. In real life, it only gets more complicated. Another example, interpretations of the U.S. Constitution have historically been divided on the letter versus the spirit debate. For example, at the founding, the Federalist Party argued for a looser interpretation of the Constitution, granting Congress broad powers in keeping with the spirit of the broader purpose of some founders. The Federalists would have represented the spirit aspect. In contrast, at the time, the Democratic Republicans, who favored a limited federal government, argued for a strict interpretation of the Constitution, arguing that the federal government was granted only those powers enumerated in the Constitution and nothing that is not explicitly stated. They represent the letter interpretation. In the present day, this debate goes on. We have two camps, the living Constitution scholars who advocate for the spirit-esque interpretive strategy, and then we have the originalists or the textualist scholars who advocate for a more letter-based approach. Now, I say all this and I bring this all up to make a point that at the end of the day, Change happens through laws, and sometimes by just one simple clause, one sentence, a few words strung together, with the power to change the lives of an entire country, a race, gender, generation, and life on Earth, and even Earth itself are all governed by these laws. These laws end up, shaping our lived reality, and depending on your income, your gender or your credit score, your criminal record, and in some cases, your ethnicity. From our lived reality, we create art and culture and stories and movies and fairy tales that end up shaping our behaviors and unconscious biases that in turn informs, future laws. The cycle repeats. It's all connected. So it is not wrong to say that our country, in this world that we live in, there is nothing more powerful than the letter and or spirit of the law. All of this is why I feel so deeply drawn to the work of this particular commission. I see it as a challenge to write better laws, better stories that reflect, the challenges of our community today. Just as our city charter was written in 1965 to address the challenges of that time. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of information or background that I was able to find in the 1965 San Jose City Charter, other than, and I quote, 15 local landowners gathered to write the blueprint for how the city would operate, end quote, by Charles Davidson, a member, a successful developer of the 1965 Charter Review Commission. Mr. Davidson did recently pass away earlier this year. He was also a very notable philanthropist. And so fast forward to right now, Right now, the 2021 Charter Review Commission reflects the diversity. However, in present day, the 2021 Charter Review Commission reflects the diversity of our community as it is today. And these 23 individuals do hold the power to build upon that work. They still are only an advisory commission, and council holds no obligations to their suggestions, as it is currently written anyways in Section 10, page 35 of our city charter/constitution. Now, this commission has been meeting every other Monday for the past 5 months, and the work of the commission is happening in 3 phases. Phase 1 is study, which is from around, they started in January and it ended around the end of May. Phase 2 is discussion, which just started, and it's from June and goes until about August 4th. Phase 3 is the drafting and finalizing of reports from about mid-August to the end of November. And all of these dates, their work plan is a living document subject to change. And again, you can check out the link to their calendar in the show notes. Okay, so I'm going to share a few clips, and one of these clips is actually from former District 4 Council member Lan Diep from the first commission meeting held on January 11th.
Thank you, Zay. Lun, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. So in regards to process, just that we're all on the same page on what the process is, whether that's, Robert's rules or just casual dinner table conversation, or, somebody gets a stick to speak for 5 minutes and we pass it around. Whatever that is, it doesn't have to be Robert's rules, but we're all we know the ground rules rather. And also it's not clear to me how long this commission is assembled for, whether it's like 6 meetings or 12 meetings or twice a month or what that is, but having a set of the schedule so we can plan our lives around that. There was somebody mentioned earlier that the council will probably give us more instructions about what to discuss. I won't color that. I think there were 3 distinct things from memory to discuss, but there might be more. But I think just with the recognition that our reports, the majority report and minority report, will be a starting point for council discussion, and ultimately the 11 of them on the council to decide what amendments to move forward with to put before voters. and knowing that we're really creating a report to spark a discussion. If we have the time, I wouldn't even limit ourselves to the things the council wants us to talk about. If we have the time, that is, look at the full charter, read the whole thing, and if there are things that we feel that, hey, maybe it's time to update this from the 1960s, we can insert that too, because it's really just a recommendation and a point of discussion. So there, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you.
Now, speaking personally, I was thinking the same thing. Honestly, I couldn't agree more. Lan is making an excellent point. We should be studying the entire charter. With that said, I'm going to recap phase 1 with a focus on the additional measures and the other task measures in later episodes. Other cities have done all of these things, but could San Jose, have their own Bill of Rights? Could the chief of police become an elected position? Can we even begin addressing the climate crisis on our city charter? All of these things are extremely important because a lot has changed since 1965 and a lot has changed since 2020. And the more our local governance structures and processes can more quickly adapt to these changes, the better served our communities would be. We've all witnessed and experienced the proverbial bureaucratic red tape that it takes forever to accomplish and move things along, which has generally been true, I would say, up until 2020, when not just San Jose, but all cities across America and the world have been forced to adapt to a new way of governance, practically overnight. For example, virtual meetings have been a huge benefit to the community, definitely to me, and it's increased participation and access. It cuts down on driving, pollution, and the time needed to be able to attend. Why didn't this happen earlier? Well, it was because of a law, particularly called the Brown Act, because of a very specific clause that had to do with serial meetings, and we won't get into that here, but I promise we will later. Now, as well-intentioned as the spirit of that law was, the Brown Act was written in 1953. Well before the proliferation of the internet, smartphones, social media, and communications as we know it. Here in Silicon Valley, intentional innovation and reverence for process improvement is a core principle of tech companies. And that's why Silicon Valley in particular has churned out so many things that have changed the world. And I feel it's only fitting that we also should begin applying that same tenacity within our local government. And if anything, I feel like what happened in 2020 and what is happening now has definitely proven that local government is very capable of doing that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about innovation as of late. So the city of San Jose recently established around the end of 2020 the Office of Racial Equity, aka ORE. The Office of Racial Equity is responsible for advancing systems change through a city-wide racial equity framework that will examine and improve San Jose's internal policies, programs, and practices to eradicate any structural and/or institutional racism in the city of San Jose. Now, I'm all for starting with the basics. So what is racial equity? Well, for San Jose, it is defined as when race no longer predicts life outcomes and when outcomes for all groups are improved. The following clip is another clip from the Charter Review Commission meetings. This one is from the May 3rd Commission meeting, and it dives in a little deeper into that statement by Sabrina Barra-Garcia from the Office of Racial Equity.
And I'm Sabrina Barra-Garcia, pronouns she and her, and I'm Latina. I started with the city in 2015, working with one of the council offices prior to joining the Office of Immigrant Affairs in 2017. And I was actually in the second staff cohort completing the GARE training in 2019. So now that the Immigrant Affairs group has become a part of the Office of Racial Equity, I am also a member of the Office of Racial Equity. So we are going to start, we're going to beg your patience because we're starting from all different places, experiences, and races. So we're going to start with the basics. So if you will allow some grace for that. We hear the term racial equity quite often, but what does it actually mean? And, oops, sorry. And this is the definition that we're using right now. And it actually comes in two important pieces. The first half about, what does it mean when race no longer predicts life outcomes? Well, that means that Black and brown people will be just as likely to own a home, graduate from college, live the same number of years, have a stable living wage job, and be treated with respect by law enforcement as someone from a different race, like a white person. And then the second half of this, that outcomes will improves outcomes for all groups. So this is important because this is about taking care of all parts of our community so that our community as a whole is better off and the individuals within it are also better off. So when we're aiming for equity, that actually means allocating resources towards people and places who are most impacted and most at need until those people or places are on a level playing field with the rest of society. And have to recognize that there are macro factors that also contribute to these outcomes. Equity is about restoring power and resources to those most harmed by the legacy of slavery, colonization, genocide, and other harms like segregation and redlining. So the impacts of these events persist in ways and contribute to the racial disadvantages we see in the data. And this also usually begs the question from people, why should we lead with race? Quite frankly, because race matters. We live in a highly racialized society. We know that some progress has been made over the years when it comes to equity, but if you look at any measure of success, whether that's income, education, health, criminal justice, et cetera, significant differences in outcomes based on race remain deep and pervasive. Data shows across all at-risk groups that Black and brown people are experiencing this worst outcomes. So that means Black and brown LGBTQ people, disabled people, women, for example. So if we are specific about looking at outcomes for Black and brown people, then we can also address other forms of inequity. We don't end with race. It's just a place to start if we want to have the greatest impact because it cuts across all other things. And then that leads us to a second point, which is that intersectionality is key. Just because we're leading with race doesn't mean that we don't care about or that there isn't room for considering other disadvantaged groups across other categories, like people with disabilities, women, non-binary or transgender people, those who are in poverty, for example. So the Office of Racial Equity agrees with that other marginalized identities face disadvantages. Beginning with race helps us develop the framework to address system disadvantaged by other groups as well.
Now, I wanted to highlight that clip to help us get into the headspace of what we're dealing with today. And it's a really great presentation. If you want to check out the whole entire presentation, you can find that in the past meetings show notes. And the link is in the show notes. And that portion starts at around the 1 hour and 33-minute mark. And they have their work cut out for them, the ORE, that is. And one of the most important things that is going to be needed as we begin addressing this work is representation and, comments and engagement with the impacted communities that we're trying to uplift and better serve. So how do we do that? Well, the significant moment that we all hold in our hands right now is that this Charter Review Commission, which again has not happened since 1986, it could become the framework for how the ORE carries out its work. You don't get more granular and down to, the roots than the foundational document of your city. That is where we can begin to really create systemic change. To illustrate what that could look like, I'm going to play another clip from earlier in the meeting. That was a presentation by the Detroit City Charter Commission. They started their work, I believe, back in 2012. Officially, the commission did not start, I believe, until 2018. Now, their structure is slightly different in that they are an independent commission, meaning that they are their own legislative body, not under the umbrella of the city of Detroit, and their recommendations go to the state. The San Jose Commission is under the city's purview, and their recommendations go to City Council. However, the work is generally the same. They are there as representatives of their community to study and make recommendations on the changes to their city constitution, aka charter.
Okay, well, thank you for having Commissioner Campbell and myself. I am Carol Weaver. I am chair of the Detroit Charter Revision Commission. In November of 2018, 9 of us were elected to the Charter Commission. And when we were elected, we were sworn in, I think about 9 days later. And at that meeting, I was elected as chair of my peers. And let's see. We started off a little contentious. We were all just trying to get to know each other. And I thought it would be best if we started off with identifying committees. So, as you know, the charter is the law for the city, and it was the law for the city of Detroit. So I thought that we needed to go over each and every department that was in the charter. So I sat down with each commissioner and asked who would like to chair which committee. And they let me know. And I would just read, if you are so inclined, the different committees that we have. Our first committee is Budget and Finance, and that monitors the assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenditures. Other charter commission. Next, we had the personnel. The personnel committee was to interview candidates for positions and recommend applicants to the whole body and to oversee the commission work. We have had an executive director, but he is no longer with us. And we have a general counsel, we have a researcher, and we have we had an administrative assistant up until about a week ago. But now we are hiring media to help us to campaign for the charter, to educate the citizens on the charter.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
Clarifying question for this commission. Was there any specific direction that was given to your commission when it was founded? How did the commission start? What was the purpose for the commission's inception?
So the purpose was for us coming together. So we had a 2012, we were just coming out of bankruptcy. We had a 2012 charter, and they made a number of changes to the charter. And so they put on the ballot in 2012 that if approved, the citizens of the city of Detroit would have 6 years from that time, a question to be put on the ballot. Would you like to open up this charter and review it? And more people said, I think about 700 people said they would like to open the charter. So we put it on the ballot. We ran for a seat on the commission, and 9 of us were selected. So that's what happened.
Great, thank you.
And so when I became chair, I thought that it was best. I was trying to bring the group together. There was no direction from anyone. And so I thought it best that we kind of take the lead from the 2012 charter. And so what they did, they had a number of committees, and I just duplicated that. And I just decided to ask each commissioner which one they would like to chair. Okay, and so any other questions on that?
No, thank you. I just thought it'd be helpful to have a little bit of context about how your commission is different than this commission. As you may know, this commission was created by the Council of San Jose to investigate a few different topics. But this commission has a bit more direction, is actually in the process of coming up with subcommittees. So this is a good time to hear from you all about your process. Great. Yeah.
So we had the Rules, Planning, and Structure Committee, and that was to oversee compliance with the bylaws and to propose changes in the bylaws for consideration and approval from the whole body. It was to oversee the compliance with the commission's flight plan. and to make any proposed changes in the flight plan. Next, and then we had the actual departments within the city. So we had a Public Agencies and Safety Committee, which Commissioner McCampbell is over, and they were to look into airport, building safety, engineering, fire, municipal parking, police, and a board of police commissioners, the Department of Transportation, Department of Appeals and Hearing, the Detroit Detroit Area Regional Transit Authority, the Wayne County Health Authority for Detroit, the Public Works, Public Lighting, the Water Department, Health, Homeland Security, and I'll let Commissioner McCampbell go on and on. And after that, we had the internal and external departmental operations that looked at the city council, the city clerk, our district courts, the civil rights, inclusion, opportunities, human resources, general services, pension and retirement, the appointed boards and commissions, the mayor's office, the election office, and the elections commission, the law department, the technology department, board of ethics, cable commission, board of review, inspector general, media services, ombudsman, auditor general, the division of the chief financial officers. Then we had the Economic Growth and Development Committee, which was the planning and development, empowerment zone, workforce development, just a number of the different authorities that we have within the city. So our next subcommittee was the Neighborhood and Community Service, which we took care of we had our youth, seniors, disabilities, arts, civic center, library, human services, historical, senior citizens, radio patrol, cultural affairs, museums, recreation, the zoo, neighborhood districts, neighborhood associations, and block clubs. Then we had Workers' Rights Committee, and that was to address all the pertinent issues pertaining to employment and contract with the city of Detroit. So I had, after I selected the chairs for each of the subcommittees, I asked the chairs if they would then ask up to 3 commissioners, no more than 3. Some of them had 2, some of them had 3 on their committee. Invite the commissioners to be on the committee. One reason why I did that and I did not select the members because I wanted the chair of each subcommittee to have a good working relationship and to build a relationship with the with their members. And so we did that our first couple of weeks, and we started having our meetings. And so what we did, we said we were going to have a operational plan, which was our flight plan. So originally we wanted to have a revised charter in November of 2020, but that did not happen. We had some hiccups early on, and but we did come together and we created a flight plan. Our first stage was our public hearing phase, and that was our education and digesting input. The commission had a series of public meetings where the commissioners learned various topics addressed in the charter. Our meetings were scheduled to address individual topics. Expert and community activists were invited to present on each topic. We probably had around 3 to 4 different presenters each meeting, from community groups to various department heads. Did we have any elected officials? I don't think we had any elected officials, but it was basically the community and some departments coming and bringing their ideas. Some community members even came together and their groups were called focus groups, and they would meet outside of the commission and then come back and bring their findings. meetings were held throughout the city. So there are 7 districts, council districts within Detroit. And so we made sure that we met at each district. We most of the times we used our recreational centers. We had recreational centers and we utilized those to have in-person meetings. We are now virtual because of COVID, but pre-COVID, we were around the city. Following each topic presented at the full commission meeting, the committee of the whole, the pertinent subcommittee met and they digest what they had heard at our committee meetings. Then the subcommittee would discuss and agree upon recommendations to be presented to the full commission at a later date. Now, should I go on? Does anyone have any questions or should I go on? Commissioner McCampbell, did you want to chime in?
Let's pause before we open up for questions.
Okay.
But I think it's a great context. I'm curious if Commissioner McCampbell has anything to share. And in our conversation, Commissioner, you talked a little bit about the value of focus groups for understanding community sentiment around your work. Would love to hear a bit more about that too, in addition to what the chair shared.
Absolutely, and thank you all for having us here. Thank you to Chair Reaver for sharing as well. And good evening, everyone. What I will say is that, what we and the commission and commissioners had continued to have a commitment on making sure that we were as participatory as possible in this process, right? Making sure that we heard as much as possible from residents, as the chair said, from experts, from the departments and the heads of our independent departments as well, to ensure that we were making sure that this charter was inclusive of the issues that folks were facing and the solutions that community members shared. So what I want to put forth to folks and talking about, we try to, again, address the issues that are impacting folks, right? I chaired the Public Safety and Agencies Committee, and you heard the vast range of departments and issues we covered, from policing to water, to fire, to our public health department, right? And during this time, as you can imagine, as we see the conversations that we're having around policing, as we see how the conversation around access to clean water, as we're seeing in Detroit in our charter, in the 2012 charter, the current one for our health department, it does not list anything for health department. It just says that the mayor may have folks to buy some more health and sanitation, right, to connect to those things. So we invited folks in to say, what are the issues and how do you feel that they should be addressed, right? Because we truly want this charter to be one that residents feel that they have a part in, and one that addresses, again, the issues that they're facing. What I also put forward for folks is that we had, as the chair said, we had this listening phase, and you had folks come in and share their thoughts around it, but then we had folks to actually put forth their own recommendations to revisions of the charter. And that was a large, we had a large time period for folks to submit recommendations. And then the subcommittees that the chair mentioned, we went through each proposal. We went through and discussed it and said, okay, this is something that we could look at to fit into the charter. It's appropriate for the charter, so let's see what would be best to fit in. If it was something that was not appropriate for the charter, we still had the conversation to say, oh, okay, well, we will make sure that this gets forwarded on to the city council or the administration to address this. So it was really, I want to stress that it was a process that invited and involved a lot of public input. We had various community organizations who work on these issues day in and day out, because I have a great set of colleagues, but I think each one of us would say we don't know everything on every topic, right? So we wanted to make sure that we have folks to lean in on those issues. Around the focus groups, I believe there may be on our website, but the focus groups came up with, I would say, a large package of information on the research that they did, the conversations that they had with folks, They looked at other, for example, we had folks to look at our civilian oversight, our police commission. They looked at commissions across the country. They looked at research around that. They looked at best practices and then came to the commission and say, here's what we recommend for our city. So I really just wanted to really stress that community aspect. And I know you all have a different process than we have because our charter will then go to the a vote by the people. But I still will stress that process for you all because it will make sure that folks feel that they are a part. I know the chair mentioned at the beginning of the meeting the intention to make sure that folks have feel that this is a process that invites everyone and their viewpoints in. That's what we try to achieve as well in our process, to make sure that folks knew that we were listening to everything that they brought forth and that we actually want to take action on what we as a collective felt best for the city. So I wanted to put that forth as well.
Now, after I listened to that segment during the meeting live that evening, I was so inspired and at the same time so overwhelmed. And I think it's just so incredible that, you know, the Detroit Commission, they have a lot more resources. They're structured very differently, but they are 9 individuals and they're tackling a lot. And we have 23 folks and we're tackling roughly 5 things. And, you know, again, that focus on number 5, which is, you know, what else do we want to do? So, you know, how do we think about police accountability? How do we think about the climate crisis? You know, last year, we had one of the worst fire seasons on record. I lived and grew up here my entire life, and I've never experienced anything like that. And it was very much the same for my neighbors who are boomers. It was for many things, just so many records were broken last year. And, you know, so how do we address that? And, for those of you interested, the very first meeting, January 11th, there was a kind of an icebreaker, and a lot of the commissioners, you know, took a minute, 30 seconds to talk about all of the things that they wish to address. And for the majority of the 23 folks, there was a high focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, you know, for our city charter, for those of you also interested, it's in the show note links. Our charter is 96 pages. It's long, but not that long. And it really, there's a lot of room in there for us to build upon and, you know, get to know. By the way, I totally forgot to mention the other voice that you hear speaking and asking Commissioner Carol Weaver the questions is Lawrence Gordeska, which is the hired consultant by the city. Civic Makers is their name, and they were hired to help facilitate these meetings. So this next clip that we're going to listen to, same meeting, and it's a question from our chair, Frederick Ferrer, for Commissioner Denzel McCampbell.
Could I ask Chair Weaver if
Yes.
you all could talk a little bit about your product? So you went through this incredible community process, but then you came up with what I think is fairly unique in this charter review governance question, and you came up with a Bill of Rights, if you will, or a document that really is asking Detroit to do something very different. And I'd love for you to talk to us about your product and that, because that to me is a critical piece of information that we'd love to hear about.
You mean our draft that we have,
Yes, ma'am.
the draft charter? I'd like to defer to Commissioner McCampbell because we really have some very progressive revisions, and most of them came from Commissioner McCampbell's subcommittee. So Commissioner McCampbell, can you just share some of we just have some amazing revisions. So if you could please share those, Commissioner McCampbell.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would say, you mentioned to the chair, you mentioned the Charter Bill of Rights. I do want to touch on that for just 1 second. We had a few council members and community organizations come up with a coalition. And what they did, they looked at various areas of the city governance and the issues. They looked at water, they looked at their environmental justice issues, they looked at policing and the militarization of our police. They looked at transportation and green space. and recreation, right? They looked at, well, I'm trying to make sure that the immigrant rights, and they looked at disability rights, right? And so they really took a look at all of they had an inclusive process, and then they brought forth they submitted the Detroit Bill of Rights as a proposal, a revision to the charter. And what I can share about this charter that now we have our final draft of, is that what we did, and I can touch on a few things. I'll touch on water for an example of first. In the city of Detroit, we have had I would say a large scale problem with water shutoffs in the city of Detroit. A lot of families have gone without access to water. And you've had a lot of folks put forth proposals to ensure that folks have access to water and also have affordable rates. And Detroit, back in 2005, actually adopted a water affordability plan, similar to what we see in the city of Philadelphia. But what the city council approved that, but it was never put into place. And advocates continue to go back to the city to say, hey, tens of thousands of families are facing water shutoffs. We have to do something about it, right? And we got to the charter process and they put forth this water affordability plan, which says that we understand that folks want to pay into the system and we want folks to pay into the system, but we also want this to be an affordable rate for families, that no family should go without access to water. So what we did, we put into the charter a water affordability clause that says, one, you cannot shut off water to folks, especially if they are have children in the home, if they are facing, if they are impoverished, if they have folks who have impacted health or anything like that. We put those revisions in. But we also said, we have folks who cannot pay their water bills, but want to pay, but they can't pay because they have large late fees. So we said we want the city to come up with a plan to address that, to ensure that folks have water. So that we have a very progressive water affordability piece in. We also said, our police force, as we see across the country, you see police forces become more and more militarized. And they're doing this through the 1033 federal program. So we said, actually, our police force is not a paramilitary force, right? We want them to be a community police department and to build those relationships with folks in the city. So actually, we're going to put limitations on the militarization, the ability to accept and receive donations of militarized equipment for police. We also strengthened our civilian oversight of our police and made sure that folks will have a robust complaint system if they put it in, and that they have folks who will actually get back with them. Detroit is was one of the first cities, if the first city, to have a civilian oversight body, our Board of Police Commissioners. But we got input from the commission itself and community members on how do we ensure that the commission has the tools that they need to be that true oversight body and also be responsive to the community. So we put those things in place as well. I talked on health, and mind you, to remind folks, we were taking up these proposals as the COVID-19 pandemic started. So we were talking about access to water, while the top thing that folks were being told during COVID-19 were to wash your hands. And we knew we had families in the city who were not able to wash their hands. We also were going through this while we knew that the charter did not provide much of any direction on the health department. We have a health department, and the administration has come up with a form of a health department. But what we said, okay, we actually, no matter who is the mayor, no matter who is the city council, we want to make sure we have a robust health department that addresses physical, emotional, and mental health of our residents. And we put forth a robust health department there, but to also ensure that the accommodations and restaurants and nursing homes and long-term living facilities had the oversight that they needed also. We also have put in, like I said, we have a civilian oversight of police. We put in a civilian oversight of our fire department. We have folks come to us very concerned about there not being oversight of a fire department who has quite a bit of a budget and assets as well. And then I definitely want to get to more questions, but just to touch on some other revisions, the Chair Weaver mentioned that we went through bankruptcy in the city of Detroit, the largest municipal bankruptcy in the country's history. And we saw that in the effect of that bankruptcy, we had pensioners really impacted by that. We have folks who had dedicated decades of their lives to the city, and in one action, their pensions were cut. So we have folks who put money into pensions and put 30, 40, 50 years into the city, and then now we're faced with poverty because of no fault of their own. And we put in protections for pensioners in our charter. We put in protections on what we call wage standard boards to take a look at the wages across the city, not to impose wage floors, or because we're prevented from doing it by state law for preemption, but to say that at least there's data out there to look at the environment of wages in the city, so there can be some action around that. And finally, what I'll say, we made sure, where I was going on the bankruptcy really impacted the ability to enforce the charter. It gave bankruptcy, and we have an emergency financial manager system. That's a whole nother session that I would need with folks, but that really took away local control and our ability to control our local government. And in that process, they suspended a lot of things that were in the 2012 charter. So what we put in the charter were clauses to ensure that our charter was enforced, and that our corporation counsel, who is our city's lawyer, actually enforced our charter, because we're not seeing that currently. So I just wanted to give a view on the way that we try to look at the structure of the city. We address the issues that are impacting folks in the city, and we really created with various ways of advisory commissions, a way for folks to be involved in city governance as well.
I don't know about you, but I am very wowed by this idea of the Bill of Rights. And after watching these meetings for the last 5 months, I have to be honest, I was feeling a little bit discouraged and hopeless, because the process was so hard. And well, this is what systemic change looks like. It's not instant, and however, it is a lot more achievable than we would think on a local level. And what the city of Detroit has been able to do is nothing short of remarkable. And in all fairness, they started thinking about this process in 2012, and they didn't really get to the work until, around 2018. And they've been working on it since, including during the pandemic and, taking pauses, I'm sure. And I'm sure that there are many other challenges that we did not get into, with the 1 hour and a half that we had their time that evening. So next up, from the same team, Detroit Commission team, we do have their outside legal counsel, Lamont Satchel. And he's going to break down, the process even further and address, the technicalities of the charter work.
My name is Lamont Satchel. I had the, the distinction of not only serving as general counsel for the current commission, but for the prior commission in 2008, the 2008 Charter Revision Commission. So I have quite a bit of experience working with charter commissions, and I know one of the things you wanted me to speak to was sort of how to make sure there's equity in the document. But I'd like to sort of just quickly talk about the process, which I think is very important. And my recommendation is this: begin with the end in mind. I assume that your charter has to be approved by the voters. And if that's the case, that's what you need to start with.
I mean, these, just to be clear, these are recommendations that'll be given to council, and then council will decide whether something goes. The council will make the decision about whether or not to put anything in place. Not to say that this can't go to the ballot, but this is a council-driven charter review process.
Okay, I guess so. My recommendation still obtains. I think you need to make sure that you craft and put together a document that has wide support and input from all of your stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I'm not just talking about within city government. I mean anyone who can be and is impacted by that charter. And I don't know what the process is or the format of your charter is, but you have to think very broadly about everyone who could be impacted by it, because those are the individuals who will bring to bear the types of political pressure or input to the council to make sure that the document you put together is given due consideration and adopted by the council. One of the things I think is very important to do as you seek to garner the input of everyone is to sort of assign certain people on the commission with responsibilities for certain stakeholders. They'll sort of be the point person for those stakeholders. I think that's very important to do that, so that there's always a connection between the commission and the stakeholders, and there's someone who they could quickly get in contact with if they have any issues or want to discuss a matter related to that group or that proposal. The other thing is, I think what you need to do is early on think about sort of buckets of topics and where you're going to place certain proposals that come in. Organizing the effort is, I think, is extremely important. The last commission, we had about 500 and something individual revisions, which I know very well because I had to go through each one of them and provide an analysis of them. We had about 300-400 with this commission. So it's very important that you begin the process to start to organize a way to review and categorize the different revisions that will be submitted to you. One of the things that we did with the prior commission, and we attempted to do it with this commission, but we didn't get a chance to because of the pandemic, was we had what we called a constitutional convention, right? Where, so our process was we solicited the revisions, each, in this case, the current commission, they came through committees. The committees decided which ones they wanted to bring forward to the full committee of the whole for adoption. And things culminated into a discussion draft. So once the commission decided, here are the things that we want to go with, we created a discussion draft, which was basically the charter with all the revisions, circulated out to all the stakeholders. With the last commission, after we did that, we had a constitutional convention where we invited stakeholders to come in and give their input with respect to the various revisions that had been offered up. The discussion draft is very important, and when you do the discussion draft, one thing I would suggest you do is commentary, right? Because if this is adopted, at some point, if a legal issue comes up as to what was the effect, what was meant by a certain provision, courts will likely look to the commentary. We had the case here where the current mayor ran for mayor the first term, and he missed the deadline, and he claimed that he met the requirements of the charter. The court looked to the charter commentary and says clear from the commentary what was meant by the language there, and you missed it. The other thing is the commentary is very important for purposes of garnering support for what you've done, right? Because you make a change, right? And folk don't know why you made the changes. They read the charter, they'll just see that, this language may have been changed here. But what the commentary allows you to do is to explain, give the rationale and the basis for the change. And it's also an effective tool for marketing, if you will, the charter, because as you use that document, as it goes out, it's a way of garnering support and educating the public with respect to what was changed and why it was changed. And I would suggest that you be very liberal in your explanation with respect to what change was made and why it was made, and the impact that you believed it is going to make as a result of the change. As far as equity, I think one of the things to look at is, and I know we did this with our prior commission and the current commission, is what are sort of the hot topics of the day? What are the issues out in the community right now that really need to be addressed? Back with the prior commission, we'd come out of some issues with respect to the mayor, who ended up being going to jail. So there was this big push to put in place measures to hold government accountable and to prevent abuse of government, right? So we ended up putting an inspector general into city government, an office of inspector general. We made other ethical changes in terms of putting together an ethics policy, and did other things with respect to removing political figures and appointees from office if they engage in certain practices. With this current commission, one of the issues that's come up is equity in terms of race, right? And so we decided to put together a commission, task force on reparations, to look at the issue. What's the involvement of the city of Detroit government in the slave trade and in systemic racism? We've also looked at issues with respect to affordable housing, right? And put in some language in there that allows the city government to take into consideration an adjusted AMI that is lower enough for individuals within the city to qualify for housing. Award affordability was a big issue here. You probably have heard about that in Detroit, clearly in Flint, the issues up in Flint, but we had a lot of water shut off here in the city among low-income individuals. And it's sort of the perfect storm happened because it happened during the pandemic, right? So you could imagine what the backlash of that was. So we put some language in the charter that talks about affordable water process and programs for water affordability and the like. We put in language in there with respect to responsible contracting. Make sure that the city government engages in practices with respect to contractors that allow for equity in how they go about contracting with outside entities for the city. There's a whole range of things we put in there. The last commission, one of the things we put in was there's a big issue in the city of Detroit was with respect to, for instance, car insurance. Insurance is you wouldn't believe the prices. So we knew at that time that there was a legal issue with putting that in the charter, but we framed it in such a way that we put an obligation on the city government to take every means and every measure to do what was necessary to address and lower the cost for insurance. And it resulted in, when the new mayor came in, he going to the state legislature and working out a deal where we ended up getting very lower insurance rates here in the city of Detroit. But a lot of that would not have happened had that not been a requirement in the charter requiring that to happen. So I say that to say this, that that brings up this issue. You have to decide early on what is the nature of your charter, right? Is it aspirational, or is it more, I'll say, legislative, right? And what's that balance? Because if you don't have that discussion, you down the line, you're going to run into issues where folk are saying that's not something that should be in the charter, and you're now trying to defend and think about something that you didn't think about in the beginning, right? So you need to say to yourself, okay, look, have that discussion and hash it out with each other, right? Because someone says it's just aspirational, you just set the framework. Others say, no, we can be more specific with respect to directing government to do things that normally would not be in the charter. So to the extent that your charter allows that type of flexibility, I think you have to have that discussion, because you're going to run into a situation where, you know, you want to do something and it's not something that you would generally find in a constitution. And so my advice would be, don't get caught up on these niceties of, you know, what traditionally a constitution is and a charter. If the charter allows the flexibility for you to be more progressive and more legislative and prescriptive with respect to what you put in there, take advantage of that to the extent that it makes sense, right? Now, I'm not saying you turn the charter into a city code, but what I'm saying is you should not be afraid to speak through the charter on an issue that, for instance, in our case, we've seen that city councils have been shy to speak to for whatever political reason. They don't want to deal with the issue, right? They would love for someone else to deal with the issue. And if it was in the charter, oh, we're forced to do it, we'll do it. But it's something that, they don't want to, you can't get any agreement with respect to, or consensus with respect to the city council to do something. So if there are things like that where, hey, this has been a hot button item for 20, 30 years and everyone's been scared to do something about it, right? And if you think it has the support of the voters or significant stakeholders, then I would offer it up and say, look, here's something we think that this charter, that needs to be incorporated in the charter that you need to deal with.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Satchel. I'm just going to step in and thank you for your comments. I want to make sure we have enough time for commissioners to ask questions of you all.
Okay.
We'll transition there and.
All right, my fellow San Joseans, what are we going to do? There is a lot of work ahead of this commission. And to be honest, they desperately, and they, I mean the City of San Jose Charter Review Commission, desperately need more participation from the public. This can't work without your participation. Now, I will share one notable barrier that we face that the City of Detroit does not, and that is the Brown Act. Right now, the commissioners have not been able to deliberate as much as I'm sure they would like to during these meetings. Due to the Brown Act, they are highly discouraged from, meeting outside of the public commission meetings, something that will soon be changing as they set up subcommittees in phase 2. This is difficult stuff. This is hard stuff. As a person experiencing this commission for the first time, it was a very big learning curve and very time intensive. The process of civic participation, without a doubt in my mind, needs drastic improvement. It shouldn't be this hard. Just as we saw that, when we made voting easier during 2020, we had a record turnout. So making civic participation easier, that is also something that makes sense and that we should be constantly working towards. If you found yourself inspired and, called to do something for the vulnerable and marginalized people in your community that, do not have the privilege of this time to participate, please show up on June 14th for public comment. Tell the commission, especially the chair and civic makers who, are the people that are in charge with setting the agenda and what gets discussed and not discussed. But really, all of the commissioners are there to listen to the public. But without hearing from the public, they are at a disadvantage to be able to advocate for the changes that we all collectively know we need. Another very important date coming up is June 28th. And that is going to be the first public hearing where all commissioners, again, will be all ears. This specific meeting, a public hearing, is designed specifically to listen to the community. Now, public comment can be very intimidating. I know when I first started, I was nervous that, 2-minute timer is deeply anxiety-inducing for me personally. I often ended up speaking way too fast. I trip over my words. I'm making an awkward exit with 30 seconds to spare. And from that experience, I decided that I would provide a public comment guide. So if you sign up for our commission newsletter, the newsletter link, show notes, you will receive just some suggested helpful tips that, lessons learned from myself participating in this process. Lastly, on the January 25th commission meeting, I made a public comment advocating for a San Jose Constitutional Convention as, the best way to approach with this work, with collaboration in mind with the people of San Jose. And I spent the next 5 months waiting and, doing some of the work myself as a regular resident, and really also second guessing myself a lot. And, am I just too ambitious? What am I doing? And when I heard Lamont Satchel say that the city of Detroit also hosted, a constitutional convention, I definitely had a moment of validation. And so I'm happy to report that, OSJ has been quietly launching a test pilot of our civics masterclass on how to participate. And we are about finished with our test pilot run. We are working to repackage that class and make it a little bit more accessible for everyone. If this is something you are also interested in being a part of, please subscribe to the newsletter in our the link in our show notes, and you will get all the information for that. This civics masterclass is designed to help the everyday resident. You can have absolutely no experience in this stuff to be able to navigate this process and effectively participate and feel meaningfully engaged in the legislative process of this commission's work. We will cover Government 101. We'll cover parliamentary procedures. What is Robert's Rules of Order? What is Rosenberg's Rules of Order? We're going to cover a little bit of the Brown Act. We cover city records and policy research and legislative research. And then we cap it off with advocacy, how to tell your story, how to craft your own proposal and submit it for consideration. And if that seems wild, maybe it is, but at the same time, this opportunity exists right now for anybody living in San Jose who wants to participate. There is no age barrier. There is no citizenship barrier. There is no barriers. There is maybe a language barrier. No, there is a language barrier. However, the commission is working on providing language services. And so all you have to do is request it. And, letting the city clerk know ahead of time will definitely help them better prepare for that moment. But language translation services is provided. Now, there is also a civic education barrier, but that's why I wanted to do the civics masterclass, so that we can really be intentional about setting up, our everyday residents for success, because they deserve to be a part of this process. For those of you that are not in San Jose and are still interested, if you live in the U.S., it is likely that your town or city has boards and commissions and committees. Look them up. If you can't find them on the website easily, call your city clerk and, follow along on the commission meetings. Join one. You could literally end up changing your city constitution if they don't have a civic education, process for you. Send them a copy of this episode. I'd be happy to speak with them or help you start your own. And lastly, subscribe. Please judge me in the ratings. Leave me love letters or feedback. I welcome them all. If you have ideas, tips, or want to volunteer, hit me up, onlyinsj@gmail.com. I know this stuff is dense, and I thank you endlessly for spending your time with me. All right, y'all. Until next time.